Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty?
Yes.
And Mr. Kohberger, you understand that by entering the guilty plea in this case, you would be giving up your right to appeal any decision this court made, as well as your sentence?
Yes.
You're watching Court TV. I am Cody Thomas. Now, we've spent the past few hours recapping the top trials we've covered here at Court TV in 2025. But what about the high-profile cases that never actually went to trial and were resolved with plea deals? Now, that takes us to Idaho, where earlier this year, weeks before his trial was set to begin, Bryan Kohberger admitted to the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. Now, Kohberger avoided trial and a possible death sentence by pleading guilty to the stabbing deaths of Madison Mogen, Xander Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, and Kaylee Gonzalez in November of 2022. Now, Kohberger was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences, but not before the families of the victims delivered emotional victim impact statements. Let's take a look back to some of those.
Evil has many faces, and we now know this, but evil does not deserve our time and attention. We are done being victims.
We are united in our disgust and our love for these children. Today you have no name. Because when this all started, we all came together and we said, let's stop even talking about his name and just use initials. So even the media just calls you BK. That's all you are.
You want the truth? Here's the one you'll hate the most. If you hadn't attacked them in their sleep, in the middle of the night, like a pedophile, Kaylee would have kicked your ass. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, jail records reviewed by Court TV show Kohberger is being held in the state's only maximum security prison in the J Block, alongside other convicted killers, including Chad Daybell, you remember him, and Thomas Creech, who are both sentenced to death. And as for the latest for the convicted killer, according to investigators, Kohberger is so unhappy with his current situation in prison that he is threatening self-harm in an attempt to be moved. Now, no word yet from the Department of Corrections on whether that move will happen. Now, our guests are back with us, Krista Ramey and Matt Roberts. Krista, I want to start with you. Now, of course, the bulk of this plea deal for Kohberger was the fact that he would avoid the death penalty. Now, Krista, I don't mean to be morbid, but what is the death penalty for if not a case like this one? Why did the prosecution spare this killer when 4 other families won't be able to see their loved ones ever again?
Yeah, gosh, I had so many mixed feelings when I heard about this. And, you know, as a family member, you know, I myself had a family member murdered, and I know how I feel about just wanting that justice for my family member. And I think that, you know, you heard the kind of mixed feelings that these families had about the prosecution's decision to enter into this plea. I'm not sure why it happened, but I also kind of think that not having the trial was probably a really good thing for the family in many respects in terms of their mental health, their own well-being, and their ability to move forward without just, you know, hearing the crippling details, the gruesome nightmare, you know, that was their child's last moments on earth. And so I think in some respect, this was mercy for the family as much as it was mercy for Bryan Kohberger. You know, I don't know for sure, and I'm sure that those conversations were happening. You know, Marsy's Law gives families voices all across this country. I think that that is true in Utah, or in Idaho as well, rather. So I think that their voices were heard, and the prosecution made what they believed was the best choice for everybody going forward.
And Matt, real quick here from the prosecution standpoint, as a prosecutor yourself, without that DNA on the knife sheath, could the prosecution have won this case on those pure circumstantials? I mean, they had phone data and location data that did not look good for Kohberger, but that data isn't definitive.
Yeah, I think that really did put it over the top, but I think Kristen nailed it there, that this was a case that the prosecution probably needed to resolve and did so after close consultation with the family, and I think it was ultimately the right decision for those reasons that Krista talked about. Winnable without that knife? Yes, but definitely a more challenging case for sure.
Absolutely. All right, Krista, Matt, let's head to Florida for another high-profile plea deal. Now, this one in the Madeline Soto murder case of defendant Stephan Sterns. Now, back in July, one day before his sex crimes trial was scheduled to begin, Sterns accepted a deal in exchange for avoiding the death penalty for sexually abusing and killing 13-year-old Madeline Soto. Now, she was the daughter of Jen Soto, his on-again, off-again girlfriend. Now, his plea hearing was filled with emotional impact, statements from Maddie's family and friends, but notably absent, and I was there, was her mother. Sterns also spoke at his plea hearing where he said he misses Madeline. Take a listen.
I have nothing but sorrow for her loss, and I miss her all the time. Her passing has torn me and my family apart as well, and she truly was a joy. I pray to God that she is in heaven and that he's taking good care of her. And I hope she gets to join the choir because she had a beautiful voice. I will miss her all the time. I will never not honor her memory. And I apologize for all the pain.
Now, Sterns had faced two separate trials centered around Soto, one for 60 sex crimes charges that included child pornography and sexual assault, and the other for murder. Now, Soto's body was found in a wooded area 40 minutes from her home days later, and as part of the agreement, Sterns agreed to a predetermined sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Krista and Matt still with us. Matt, I want to come back to you here real quick. This is another one where the killer gets a deal, right? But the victim is still dead, and her family is still gonna have to live with this forever. But I'd be remiss to sit here and act like life behind bars is this easy task. You know, the next time he comes out of that place, he'll be in a box, right? So my question is, Matt, is this justice for Madeline Soto?
I think it probably is, but really the only person that's qualified to answer the question in those circumstances are the victims, right? I mean, they are the ones that have to deal with the lifelong consequences of not having their loved one around. So whenever you talk about, and we don't have the death penalty in Michigan, so it's not something that we deal with here, but whenever you talk about that situation, you have to really get the only person really qualified to say, I want that person to either live or to die, or live in prison or die, is the victim. And I think that's got to be the most important consideration for the prosecution here.
And Krista, you know, the whirlwind that still surrounds this case is Jen Soto. I was at that plea hearing. This is your own daughter. You're not there for the plea hearing. Is there, you know, people think that she was somewhat involved. Is there a world where prosecutors, investigators bring her in on charges and, you know, cahoots with this murder of her own daughter?
I from the very beginning, thought that there was something very suspicious about Jen Soto's behavior during the whole aftermath of this, and up and to and through the sentencing. You're right. And I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't something in terms of a cover-up or, you know, the kind of the after the fact kind of thing. But I think that she's also probably a victim of abuse herself by him. It's my suspicion.
Absolutely. All right, Krista, Matt, again, sticking around. Coming up, we continue our look at the infamous cases that never went to trial. Several defendants took plea deals, but one of them never made it to the courtroom for sentencing. That story and more, straight ahead.
Coming soon to Court TV.
A Microsoft executive gunned down. Now his ex and her new husband are charged with his murder.
I'm gonna kill her.
An alleged murder plot involving a family's au pair and the married father she worked for.
A social media sensation, now a suspected killer. Why do you have something against me?
She wrote a children's book about her husband's death. Now she's accused of killing him.
The high-stakes trials you don't want to miss. Coming soon, only on Court TV.
It is my understanding you wish to plead guilty to a fourth-degree sexual contact, criminal sexual contact. Is that correct?
Am I pleading guilty?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Okay.
I am?
No.
Okay.
No. Nope, that's not how it works. Listen to me, Mr. Busey.
Huh?
Did you talk to your attorney about how you want to handle your case today?
Yes.
Yes.
Actor Gary Busey pleading guilty to one count of fourth-degree sexual criminal contact. Now, he's one of many people on our list of defendants who did not go to trial this year, but instead entered guilty pleas. Now, Busey pleaded guilty in July to inappropriately touching a woman while she was taking a picture with him at the Monster Mania convention in Cherry Hill, New Jersey in 2022. Now, Busey was there to make a guest appearance at the event. He was subsequently sentenced to 2 years of probation in September. Let's bring back in our guest, Matt Roberts, here still with us. All right, Matt, you know, Gary Busey, kind of a famously weird dude. Seems like he got off a little light here, given the allegations, right? It also seems like these plea deals are being given out like we're on the Oprah show. Now, does this resolution here with Gary suggest a trend towards plea deals in celebrity cases, or is this likely the result of maybe some high-dollar lawyering?
I think probably it's a combination of both. I think in most cases there's a discussion at least about a plea deal to be had here, so I'm not surprised that there was one in this case too. And yeah, you're right. Gary Busey is a very strange guy. You could just see it there from that plea. So not really surprised about this resolution in this case, I would say.
And I understand we have Krista back with us now. Krista, you know, with Gary Busey here, prosecutors, they have to accept these plea agreements. You can hand out a plea agreement, but it has to be accepted by the court. Now, you know, with something like this, Gary Busey, with these allegations, are victims taken into account when these deals are on the table?
Yes, they are. And I think that most prosecutors do. And they take that very seriously. So I would imagine that victims were consulted with by the prosecutors and probably voiced their opinions about whether or not they wanted a plea deal. But ultimately, it's the prosecutor's choice and the judge's choice to accept it. It's not the victims. So the victims do have a voice, but they're not the ones that are the final decision makers in this.
All right, Matt and Krista, now to California, the case of baby Emmanuel Haro. Now, the 7-month-old was reported missing back in August by his parents. 3 months later, investigators revealed his tragic fate. Take a listen.
He was abducted last night from Big 5. Somebody struck my wife while she was trying to change his diaper.
It's appropriate to have a press conference because it was the defendants in this case that had a press conference first. And they did so in order to tell the public, the media, and ultimately law enforcement that their child had been kidnapped, when in fact that's not what occurred.
Within 24 hours through video surveillance, we found inconsistencies in Rebecca's statement.
Here in Cabazon at the parents' home, it is now a massive crime scene since the parents' arrest early this morning.
The filing in this case reflects our belief that baby Emmanuel was abused, victim of child abuse over time, and that eventually, because of that abuse, he succumbed to those injuries.
There is some level of cooperation with the suspects involved in this.
I believe that both of them are guilty, that we can prove it's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt for both the murder and the filing of the false police report.
Calling the case of Jake Haro and Rebecca Haro.
His father, Jake Haro, pleaded guilty to his murder and was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. And baby Emmanuel's mother, Rebecca Haro, has pleaded not guilty to second-degree murder and filing a false police report, and she is due back in court in January for a felony settlement conference. All right, still with us, of course, Krista, Ramey, and Matt Roberts. Matt, this one is like something out of a movie. You have these parents making up this story about how the mom was attacked in this parking lot and the baby was stolen, just to turn around for the father to admit to murdering this child. What is going on here?
Yeah, this is kind of a wild one. Anytime you see parents out in front of a story like that, you as a prosecutor, as an investigator, you're immediately going to ask some questions, especially if there's nothing to corroborate what they're saying. And I think that's ultimately what happened here. I think they just delved into the story, found it to be just not credible, started to pick it apart, and then reached this conclusion. So this is an example of how excellent police work and prosecution investigations can just bring justice for a young child here whose parents were not standing up for it and were the cause of the death.
And Krista, I want to get your same thoughts, same question. What do you see in this case here?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that first press conference of the parents seemed fake to me immediately. You know, no crying, it seemed very staged, that they were trying to set the narrative and lead the police down a certain path. And it was wrong. And, you know, this is just one of those horrible cases. I'm glad that there was a plea. I'm sure that he will be part of that plea is probably testifying against his wife, as it should be. And, you know, whether or not that one will go to trial or not, we'll see. But, you know, there needed to be something done fast here. I know that the public out here was really concerned about it as it was happening and unfolding, whether or not he was actually dead or not.
And Matt, you know, as Krista just saying, if this thing does go to trial for Rebecca Haro, she's pleaded not guilty to second-degree murder and filing a false police report. Yet your husband has said he murdered the baby, and you were standing next to him in the false video. They're talking about this whole attack that happened in the grocery store parking lot. How is she going to defend this?
I don't know. It's a head scratcher. I don't know how you get around that as a defense. I'm sure that somebody's thinking about it or at least having serious discussions with the prosecution about some type of resolution. I'd be shocked if this went to trial. I agree with Krista. I think that the father is probably lined up to testify, and that's got to push this over the top. I can't see this going to trial.
And Krista, I mean, you are the trial attorney. If you had to tackle something like this, what would be your maybe initial strategy that you can think of right here this second?
You know, I hate to go back to this, but when you see victims of child abuse die, ultimately at the hand of a parent, you wonder what that other spouse is getting for that parent. And so I think there might be some mitigation that you could argue on behalf of the wife that maybe she was herself the victim of abuse by her husband. And this is kind of what led up to it. That would be my what I'd initially be looking at.
All right, Matt and Krista, we're going to another one, another case that never went to trial, the forgotten daughter murder case of Christopher Scholtes in Arizona. Scholtes took his own life last month before being sentenced in the hot car death of his 2-year-old daughter, Parker. Now, investigators say he left his daughter in the car while playing video games and searching pornography sites inside his house. He was scheduled to be taken into custody after he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and child abuse. Here's a look at police body cam footage of Scholtes when he was notified of the investigation and his daughter's death.
I don't want to feel like we're intruding, but we're going to have to stand by with you for a while. All right. Is there a reason why? So any death, we have to treat like a crime scene. I know this is extremely difficult for you. This is a normal process that we have to follow through with. I don't want you to be blindsided by anything, but that's what's going to be going on for right now, okay?
So I'm being treated like a murderer?
No.
I just lost my...
Not at all. I know that.
Scholtes was facing up to 30 years in prison. Temperatures inside the vehicle at the time of Parker's death reached upwards of 149 degrees. Still with us, Krista and Matt. Krista, how are these hot car deaths still happening? We've seen them nationwide, a handful of them over the past decade, maybe even more, and yet they continue to pop up.
You know, there are legitimate hot car deaths that are accidents, unfortunately. I know that there's been some out here. There was a prosecutor here in California recently, not recently, but about 10, 15 years ago, that had this happen to them. You know, we get through routines of our life, and if those routines are interrupted and we're really busy, focused individuals, sometimes these can happen. But in this case, this was not that. This was legitimately, I'm leaving my child deliberately in the car while I go play video games. He didn't, you know, this was not the break in the routine, accidental death of a child. This was, you know, I don't think anything's really going to happen. And it's completely unfortunate. There's another one in the news now as well, along those lines, of a woman that went in to get a procedure done, left her child in the car. They're happening. I guess they don't think that the death will happen, but it will.
Right. And Matt, you know, since Scholtes died before sentencing, what happens to this case now? I mean, is it just done? Can the state still issue a formal ruling just for the record, given the sensitivity of the case involving this young child? Where's the accountability? What happens now?
Well, I think it differs from state to state. Certainly some states have procedures in place for if a person dies before sentencing takes place or before appeals period runs out. So it's really a case-by-case situation here. And you're right, though, it would be nice to see some justice for this child here and at least some formal record here. So we just have to leave it to history and to shows like this that carry on that memory for victims who maybe just don't get justice served.
And Krista, just real quick here, just a few more seconds. You know, if this thing would have gone to trial, had he not taken a plea deal, you know, with the whole video games and the searching, the pornography stuff, how do you think that would have fared in front of a jury?
Not well. I don't think there's much more I can add to that, Cody. I mean, he comes across as, you know, it's all about me and I'm playing video games and looking at porn while my daughter is suffocating to death in a hot car. Unbelievable. A jury would be pissed as heck.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail right on the head.